Our next presenter is Eric Higgs. Eric Higgs' pioneering research on ecological restoration has been transformational for both scientists and practitioners. And he has brought international public policy focus to restoring damaged ecosystems. A global leader who has long championed interdisciplinary science in the study of complex environmental challenges. His long-term mountain-based restoration field research has built the largest systematic collection of historic and repeat mountain photographs in the world, a unique Canadian research platform. Welcome, Eric.
You know what I'm finding so remarkable about this conference are the connections. It's an honor to be here, of course, but David, my first office at the University of Alberta was in Riel House, and I used to walk past the Garneau tree all the time. And Lisa, I do work in archives, so I'm not going to speak about it, but everything you spoke about resonates so strongly. So I love the connections that form. I love the connections that form, but I can't seem to get the slide. Oh, there we go. Great. I need first to acknowledge that the work I do is on the shared, asserted, and mostly unceded territories of Indigenous peoples across the Mountain West. And it's been a privilege to work alongside a number of First Nations communities in trying to understand the nature of historical change and how that informs how we think about the landscape now and what it might look like in the future. So, deeply grateful. So, we have such profound change happening in ecosystems. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which was announced from 2021 to 2030, has turned the heat up underneath how we think about restoration and the urgent need to restore damaged ecosystems. And this was brought to a head in Montreal last year at the Kunming Montreal Convention on Biological Diversity meetings, where Canada played a decisive role in launching a number of urgent priorities for biodiversity. And shockingly, I mean, if you had told me 5 years ago that we were going to have a major global target on restoration, I would have said, ha, ha, ha. But no, target 2 is to ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of areas of degraded terrestrial, inland, and coastal ecosystems are under effective restoration. And I can say, maybe, quietly, please don't quote me, nobody knows how to do this exactly. It's a huge challenge. So in Canada, though, we have quite a strong momentum around restoration. And the question I've been asking myself, I really want to talk about some of the mountain change photos, and I will do a little bit about that, but I really want to bring forward a policy issue. So how can we leverage Canadian experience and expertise to create an open, inclusive, and flexible approach to restoration in a time of rapid environmental, ecological, and cultural change? And I'm bringing this question forward at this meeting because I think it's a critical policy issue in Canada right now. It's a science policy issue, and it's a matter of practice, and it's a matter of reconciliation. So that's what I want to try to get to in the talk. But let's a little bit of background on restoration. So classical ecological restoration sees history, historical knowledge, as a kind of template for how it is that we go about fixing ecosystems. We look to the past prior to degradation, and we bring the ecosystem back. We usually have a singular trajectory in mind, and we focus more on composition than function. But what's happening under conditions of rapid change is that we need a new type of restoration. So one that sees history as a guide, not exactly as a template, and emphasizes function more than composition, that there's many possible outcomes, and that there are pragmatic goals around livelihood that are essential to the core meaning of restoration. And why is this changing? Well, you know about rapid change. And I'm sorry, these graphs are tiny, but this is from a paper a couple of weeks ago in Bioscience by Bill Ripple and colleagues out of Oregon State University. And you don't really have to see the graphs in great detail to see that red line, which is the most recent data. And it's just showing what's happening in terms of global phenomena. The lower right are the cumulative area burned in Canada, and that red line is 2023. So these are just dramatic changes that are taking place and driving how we think about restoration. So I've been working with a large collection of historic images that were taken as part of surveys of the Mountain West in Canada. These created the first topographic maps, and the surveyors left behind 120,000 images. So we've been going back over the last 20 years, and we've been repeating these images to chronicle change. So this is in Waterton Lakes National Park from the highest point, or one of the highest points. That was when we went back the first time in 2004. We saw a terrific landscape change. But then something remarkable happened that hasn't had a lot of wide attention, and that's the Kenow wildfire in September 2017. 6 hours. A fire crested the Continental Divide and burned through 39% of Waterton Lakes National Park, and most of the area burned was at very high or extreme severity. And it was just a sort of unprecedented event. So we've been also, and this is my little, detour into some of the field research we're doing, but we've also been trying to figure out, can we look at these images in different ways? Can we classify them? So graduate students in my research team have been looking at using machine learning to automatically classify these images, to see the change over time. This is from the same image that I just showed, and there's that wildfire. And we've been going further than that, using digital terrain and digital elevation modeling to see if we can georeference these images. So this is the very same image, but now projected as an overhead view on the landscape. So that's what it looked like in 1914. And that's the change over time. And now because it's on a spatial model, we can do all sorts of spatial analyses and so on with these models. And let's look at the wildfire, or at least the outcome of the wildfire, and look at the scope of change. So this has just been a big part of how we see the nature of change using these collections. If you're interested at all, feel free to go to explore.mountainlegacy.ca. We have about 20,000 images. They're free and open access, and glad to have anybody use them and work with them. And if you're a podcast listener, please check out this excellent episode of the Future Ecologies podcast that talks about some of the archival journey that we went through to get at these images and to work with them in the field. Just a note to the AV people, I've lost my monitor feed here on the right side. Ah, super, thank you. Now, let's get back to restoration. So we're the only country in the world, as far as I know, I've been making this contention for a while, and nobody's proven me wrong, that has a national animal that's a restoration ecologist, right? We know the beaver is a transformational animal, and so I think it's sort of our, what we ought to hold on to as restorationists. But Canadians have played an outsized role in leading and developing the field of restoration. And one major way, just as an example, is Canada developed the first national level guidelines for restoration anywhere in the world. And that was in 2008. It's not that long ago. And these three principles of restoration, that it be effective, efficient, and engaging, and now there's a fourth one, which is equitable, are now known as the Canadian principles. So we played a good role in restoration. We undertook, during the pandemic, Tri-Council Knowledge Synthesis Project to review what had happened in Canada with respect to restoration. It was a convoluted project. We had the most remarkable team across the country of graduate students involved in doing all sorts of projects. It's resulted so far in 2 publications, and I wanted to show this mostly because one of them was published in Facets, the Journal of the Royal Society. And it's been, we're trying to do is to just examine what's happened so far with restoration. And one of the questions that's emerged from this research is how big is the restoration tent? And how big should it be? And that, by the way, was the world's largest tent. But there are so many different varieties of restoration underway, just such a diversity of practice, and we're trying to understand what this means and what it looks like. We've been convening meetings in the last little while, promoting and pushing out material of different kinds to have policy influence, and starting to shape an agenda for what restoration will look like in 2030. Thank you.